Magnavox debuts the Odyssey. Sinclair goes color with the spectrum. And gamers grow up. These stories and many, many more on this episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine.
I've been waiting a long time for a chance to say this. Stop the presses.
Requiescat in pace.
Makes him crazy, man. What is a man?
It's me, Mario.
What a mess.
Get over here!
Please save me.
Welcome to the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine, the show where we travel back in time to find out what was making headlines in the video game and home computer industries 40, 30, and 20 years ago. Today we're going to be traveling back 40 years to May of 1982. I'm your host, Carl, and I'm joined again by everybody's favorite co-host, depending on who you ask, Mads.
I'm back, baby. It's been good. I'm really looking forward to this because you've been getting your kicks elsewhere, haven't you, mate?
What can I say, dude? Variety is the spice of life.
Yeah.
You know, and it's the Nordic types are cool, so I had to just move a couple countries over, and the Dutchman was there, so it was good.
Yeah. He's doing really good. I like him.
Oh yeah. No, love Wouter. He's energetic. He loves the stuff. Lots of good questions. Having a good time. He will be back. No, don't worry, everybody. He's coming back. But for today's episode, there's let's just say there's a whole bunch of stuff to talk about, and I need somebody with the discipline to keep me on track and keep it within a reasonable time limit. And that's
I'll try to whip you into shape here, mate.
Okay. We're going to cut the banter short today, just go straight to the meat of the matter. Remember, everybody, when we're talking about May of 1982, we're always talking cover dates of magazines and newspapers. So obviously the events happened at some point before that. So there's always, a little bit of discrepancy. It is simply a formatting issue and a convention. So don't send me hate mail. That being said, the first place we have to go before we turn on the time machine is, probably promote stuff. So, everybody remember, Patreon links, Twitter, all that good stuff is in the show notes. Check it out. And then, before we turn on the time machine, Mads, our good co-host, has to do a little segment we call the 7 Minutes in Heaven, where you have to play one of the games that was reviewed in a publication dated May of 1982.
Oh, yes.
And that game today is the SNK classic Fantasy.
Fantasy, yeah. Looking forward to it.
Good. Then let the 7 Minutes in Heaven begin. Welcome back from your 7 Minutes in Heaven, Matt. So, for the uninitiated who have not played Fantasy before, how would you describe the game?
It's a wonderful old arcade game. It's a vertical game, and each level you do something different. The first level you're flying above a pirate ship, and you're flying in a like a hot air balloon, and you need to land that on the pirate ship, and the ship is of course shooting cannonballs at you. I actually wonder how they shoot cannonballs like straight up, knowing just a little bit about cannons on a ship. But hey, they can shoot straight up. So you need to avoid the cannonballs and land. That's quite easily done. Then you're on the pirate ship and you want to save your lady friend, because that's what you do in old arcade games. And whenever you are moving sideways, he's waving a sword. Your little character is waving a sword. And if you move up and down, he isn't. So you need to go sideways into the enemies. They're waving swords as well. And dispatch of those while ensuring that you're not shot by the cannon. That there's a swiveling cannon that only shoots at straight angles. So you need to make sure you're not hurt by that. And then you go and grab your lady friend. But just as you're about to grab her, I'd like to say dragon comes and picks her up and flies away with her. And then we're into the third stage where you're flying in your balloon ship, your hot air balloon, and you need to avoid the dragons, and this gorilla throwing coconuts at you. And you need to do that for 3,000 kilometers probably. Whereas the first two levels are quite easy and you'll learn to master them in 2 minutes, this is devilishly hard and really, really funny. I mean, I could play this for hours, I think, because it was so frantic, that part. I really wanted to get through it, and you're sitting there, you're sweating, you're moving the stick back and forth, and you really need to be playing this with either a keyboard, I guess, or an arcade stick, because this is controlled entirely by a stick. There are no buttons or anything to press, and having the fast reflexes and getting away from those dragons, that was much more fun than it should have been. So. Yeah, great game. I'm really happy that you made me play this.
I'm glad I made you play it. The main reason I chose this game was because of its historical significance. As was previously mentioned by our good friend Ethan in an older episode's Department of Corrections, it is widely believed this is the first instance of a continue in an arcade game.
Yeah, I did notice that. That surprised me to see that in an 81 game.
Yeah, I mean, now it's being reviewed in American publications in 82 because that's when it's being released in the U.S. It did come out in Japan the year before.
Yeah.
So it is an 81 release in Japan, but it's an 82 release in North America.
It seems to be designed perfectly to try to lure people to use the continues, because I would never use continues. I didn't do that back in the day. But this is one of those games where if I'd actually gotten through that third level and then immediately died on the fourth, I would probably have popped in another quarter, because it's really a struggle. It's a hard battle to get through level 3. So
that's true. And it's doing something that virtually no arcade game did at the time, which is every level seems to be a completely different gameplay mechanic.
Yeah.
And so that is something totally, not completely unheard of. We'd had games like Gore, for example, before it, but they're telling a story, a continuing story. It's a simplistic story, but using different types of gameplay to sort of demonstrate or show different scenes in the story. And that change really gives you that feel of, I need to see what's going to come next, because you can't predict what's coming next. It's not like Defender where, you might get another new type of enemy every 5 levels or something, and the rest of the game is just faster, faster, faster. Here it's really almost a feeling of exploration, and getting to that next level means you've discovered something brand new, and you don't want to lose that gain, that thing you've earned. So you're going to throw another quarter in to see what's going to come next.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I didn't even consider this, but if I hadn't had that expectation of a completely new level, I probably wouldn't have found it as fun trying to get through level 3. If I was just waiting for a level 4 that would be the same as level 3 but a bit tougher, I wouldn't have been sweating and really wanting to get through that level. It would quickly have just become boring to do.
Exactly. It's something that later on the side-scrolling beat-em-ups will perfect. Yeah. Because when you think about a game like Final Fight, as much fun as it is, it's basically you're doing the same thing over and over again, but you want to get to the next level to find out what cool new graphics and what cool new looking enemies you're going to encounter.
Yeah.
And
well, in Final Fight, most of the enemies will be palette swaps, but oh well.
Well, yeah, but every level seems to add at least one new enemy type.
Yeah.
And the backgrounds were so pretty.
They were.
Yeah.
And you could pick up stuff and beat the enemies with. That was always a joy to do.
Exactly. So you would recommend this game?
Yes, most definitely. Everybody should play this game. It's easy to pick up and play, so just give it 10 minutes of your life. I'm sure you'll enjoy it just as much as I did.
And remember, everybody, if you want to actually see Mads play his 7 minutes and us commenting on it, then you can become a Patreon supporter of this show for just $1 a month and get that as bonus content. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Okay. With that being said, let us check in with our final stop before they turn on the time machine, and that is to see what mistakes I made in our, well, what comes before May again? It's been so long. April. That's it. April 1982 episode with our good friend Ethan Johnson in a little segment we call The Department of Corrections.
I'm sure there were no mistakes at all made.
Hello, this is a prepaid collect call from
the Department of Corrections.
This call is subject to recording and monitoring. To accept charges, press 1. You may start the conversation now.
Welcome back, Ethan. So, before we find out everything that I got wrong in our 40-year jump to, now I have to do the math in my head, what are we talking about? Oh yeah, April of 1982. I believe something needs to be done.
A very new special comment. Yes, indeed. Voter! The voter comment. Yes. If you don't, well, he does know, but if you don't know, if you, the ambiguous you out there in the great wide world don't know, co-hosts get comments. And the comment for Voter, he said he was scared of me. And I say, don't be scared, Voter. Do not be scared. Be not afeared. For the isle is full of strange noises, sounds, and sweet airs that give delight and hurt not. Bonus points if you know what that's from.
I totally want to go with Shakespeare on this, but I'm probably wrong.
All right, time to move on to the correct. If you get it right, then send it on a postcard to Video Game Newsroom Time Machine at Germany Place. That is that's the official PO box.
Yeah, that's totally going to show up. Okay.
All right, April 1982. No Easter bunnies for you. For April is the month of Easter. That's the joke. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. Yeah. I'm just talking.
Let's just get to the content.
First up, we have Pinball, because you always go back to Pinball. So in the I forget 42. What era you were talking. 42. Well, was it a 42? Well,
I did both a 42 and a 52, and I think again a 62 on that one. Yeah.
Whichever one you were talking about, I know that what you were saying is that you could win replays at the time you were talking, and I don't think that was really the case anymore. It was mainly a thing through the 40s, but winning a free play had been outlawed in many different places, and most people were not making pinball machines which you could get replays and which you could sell to somebody else and all that. I forget the full context of it, but I think the era you were talking about, it was not the case.
Okay, cool. That could be. We talked about it. We did at least 3 eras. We did a whole bunch of eras on that episode. So, yeah, it's very possible I mixed them up.
Yeah, it might have been 62 or something. And on another note of electromechanical games, metal games and pachinko are not the same. Though the prize structure is vaguely similar, metal games are not pachinko games.
Okay, so what kind of games would be metal games?
Metal games are gambling games which use the metal. They are basically redemption games. And they do, and in a sense, like pachinko, you use your medals to get more medals. In the set, the thing you put in, and in pachinko's case, you get balls and you put them in, and in the metal game case, you put in medals and you hope to get more medals. But in classification terms, a pachinko game is not a metal game.
Okay, cool. Good to know.
All right. That just to be super nitpicky about these things, but
of course,
sometimes these classifications do matter, especially in legal terms. they definitely matter.
The Pachinko lobby made sure of that.
Yes, to a degree. Yeah, metal games did get outlawed, and Pachinko did not. So that is the, not outlawed, but restricted. I mean, Pachinko is restricted. But anyways, that's going off into a whole other thing. We're talking about video games right now. And how about we talk about the first big video game, Space War? You were talking about the controls on Space War. The controls on Space War do not have any dials. The original controls of Space War were 2 levers, one which went vertically, one which went horizontally, and then a singular button.
Okay. So it was levers, not a dial.
Yeah, you couldn't twist your ship around. You held the lever to the left and then start rotating left.
Gotcha.
And I believe the backwards is thrusters, and then forward would be hyperspace when they implemented it, but it does not appear they implemented it on the first version. But you can go read about that on Alex's site, videogamehistorian.wordpress.com. He has a timeline of Space War.
Excellent, and you will find that down in the show notes.
And another note on Space War, you said that Starfield was added when they did the expensive planetarium hack, but there already was a Starfield. Or you said that a Starfield was added at some point, but there was already a Starfield in Space War, even from the very beginning. It was just random, whereas they added one that was specific.
Gotcha. Okay, that's what I got mixed up on, because I knew I listened to it was probably that panel discussion where they brought in all the survivors who had worked on it. It was, I can't remember, Strong Museum maybe?
No, Smithsonian.
Smithsonian.
Yeah.
And I remember the one guy commenting that he was the one who added the Starfield, but I misinterpreted that. So, okay, cool.
Okay. Yes, and there will be, in the somewhat near future, I am trying to finish up the video series I've been working on for a long time, and I will be going through Space War in a way that nobody has yet done in video form. So you will get to learn all about the individual processes that made Space War soon enough.
Very cool. Looking forward to it.
But not to hype things up too much here, but now we return to another repeated error from you, Mr. Carl.
Yes.
It is not Sanders and Associates.
It's Sanders Associates. Yes. Makes no grammatical sense, but sure. Okay, yeah, I know.
He was not always going to be there, so they are his associates.
This is true.
And also on Odyssey-related things, I believe you said that Bear's name actually doesn't show up on any of the patents, but it does show up on some of the patents. It's just the crucial patent of which most people were sued under was the patent which covers the coincidence of the ball, where it hits the paddle and then the ball goes off in a different direction. There's a whole thing behind that. It is very complicated to try and explain, but that is the thing which most people got sued over, not the existence of video games, which is kind of what Bear's patent covers.
Gotcha. And what I was referring to was an article in the New York Times that only listed 2 of the patents, and I'd have to go back and check, see exactly which of the 2, but Bear's name didn't show up in the article. They must have only been listing the first person who was listed on the patents.
Oh, that would be, yeah. I thought one of them was, because it's the 496 is the big patent, which is the ball one. And then there's one that covers just the general idea of hooking something into a television receiver to play games.
Yeah, I think it was the receiver, and it may have been one for the manipulation of imagery on the screen, if memory serves me right. They're not talking, or at least they didn't report on the one about the interaction of the elements. That, I think, that wasn't one of the 2 patents that were listed in this New York Times article.
I thought it was, but
oh well.
Yeah, that's, I don't remember all the dates that patents are issued. Yeah, and the issuance of those patents is a whole other thing, and maybe we'll get into that when we do we do our little Magnavox Odyssey special. We might get into legal particulars. Won't that be fun, Carl? Bring back your old law school days, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, the fact that they're being issued the patent the month before they premiere the product just shows you how delayed the patent process is.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and that's something that comes up in the court documents. Anyways, let's not get into this right now because then we're going way down into a little procedural thing. But another Odyssey-related thing is you said that there were 3 types of overlays in the Odyssey box. There are only 2 for 25-inch and 18-inch televisions at the time.
Gotcha. Yeah. I don't know where I got 3 from. Go figure.
Here's a little fun fact for you. CRTs back in the day used to be measured by their diagonal measurement, not by the straight vertical or the straight horizontal. What is the measurement from one corner to another corner?
Well, I mean, we're still doing that with flat screens today.
Oh, we are? I don't. I always thought that a 60 was 60 across, but okay, I guess I've learned something today.
I thought that it was still going by diagonals.
I've not bought a television in a long time, Carl.
Yeah, it's still going by diagonals. That hasn't changed. Because you do get TVs that have differing height width ratios.
Okay. Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah. I presume they did that back in the day to make it seem bigger than it was because, a hypotenuse is larger than either the
of course. I mean, it's a great marketing gimmick, and especially when you're dealing with a world where every TV is the same proportions, you go with the largest possible number.
Yeah, and they couldn't, and there was also the fact that they really couldn't make them much larger. 1, because they were heavy as hell, and 2, because they, there's literally just a limitation on, the electronics and everything. If you made it too much larger, then it would become blurry, and it would become too expensive to try and make something, reasonable. So, I think I had a 25-inch in my room or something like that. I mean, it was a beast. It might have been 30, something like that. It was big.
Was it built into a big wooden console?
No. This is past that era. It was a 90s CRT. But yeah, it was. Gotcha. Oh my god, throwing that out. Well, I'm sad that I did it, but we had to, But throwing that out, it was. Oh my god, getting that down the stairs. Oh jeez. Oh, you people will never know the difficulty of carrying one of those around.
All I have to say is I still remember the old school console television that we had in the basement, which is the one that I got to watch cartoons on in the mornings on Saturdays. The good old days.
Yes.
Okay, moving on.
Next up, the Chuck E. Cheese pizza. Okay. I went to Chuck E. Cheese longer than I should have. My birthday parties were at Chuck E. Cheese from 5 to 9 or something like that. I can tell you I don't remember a single arcade game that I played there. I remember Skee Ball. I don't really consider that an arcade game. And, I remember the ball pit and all that. But the one memory that sticks with me about Chuck E. Cheese is how bad their pizza was. You called it passable, and it was not. Maybe by the terms of you coming from Seattle, but I come from the East Coast. And let me tell you, the Chuck E. Cheese pizza was not good.
We had some very, very good pie shops in Seattle. But yes, you're probably right. Granted, the last time I had Chuck E. Cheese pizza would have been 1984. So, I was probably 8 years old at the time. So, yeah, you're probably correct that it was terrible. But like you, I can remember a handful of video games that I played briefly, but I was definitely a skee ball kid at the time. So
Yeah, the ticket chasing. Yeah,
exactly.
We all had it. Exactly. We had it embedded into our souls, and especially for me, there was no arcade without the redemption stuff. So that was its own whole thing. Next
you
on.
came later. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yes, I am younger. Thanks for reminding me, Carl.
Yeah.
Thanks
when you were getting the tickets on Skee Bowl at Chuck E. Cheese, you probably couldn't earn more tokens with the tickets, could you?
No, you cannot.
Yeah, that was my cool thing. Like 82, 83, if you got enough tickets, you got another token. So it basically became my first big math problem to solve was how good do I have to be at Skee Bowl so I could play forever? And that was always the thing you were chasing is if you get good enough, you can just keep making more getting more coins than you're spending.
We got a lot of good
real fast.
Good personal histories going on in this Department of Corrections today.
Oh, dude, you don't even want to know the last interview I just finished last week.
Well, we'll hear it eventually.
We'll get to it soon. But I tracked down the guy who founded the family entertainment center I used to work at as a teenager. So that's a great interview. If you want to know how that side of the business works. Very, very interesting. So I got like 2 hours with him. But that's coming down the pipeline in a couple of months.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Next up, you were talking about the bout between General Computer Corporation and Atari. You said that Atari basically steamrolled over them, but GCC claims they basically won, that they were given a good settlement because Atari didn't think that they would be able to win in court. It never went to court. But basically, the GCC people claim that they had the winning claim. But it was never tested, so we don't really know if that's the case. But that's their perspective.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, we do know in the subsequent cases that the mod boards do become illegal, and relatively quickly after it, within the year. There's cases where they do become illegal. We just reported on the show. So they may have gotten lucky, just like Sierra or Online Systems got lucky with their first Pacman clones, where the courts were like, sure, that's perfectly legit. And then subsequent Pacman clones like Casey Munchkin got thrown out. But
the legal question on a lot of those cases with the modification boards was not, is it okay to do modifications? The question was, did they do it in a reasonable fashion?
But this is the thing, is as soon as you make the argument that it limits the original copyright holder's ability to make not copies of the game, but to make derivative product of the game. That's the claim that ends up invalidating the mod boards, is that it's a limitation on derivative product.
But as far as I read in this legal stuff, their argument wasn't really necessarily on that point. It was more on the point of, is there a market for the modification boards? And there was a really weird legal argument. Eventually we come back around to the idea of, like, Game Genie eventually, comes in and makes the claim that people can modify this stuff on their own terms.
Well, but that's the end user making the modification. And it's also not altering the original game. So the end user can choose whether or not to use the modifications, but when you change it in the arcade, now the end user doesn't have that choice. I can't go to the arcade, push a button, and either hit Missile Command or whatever they were calling their version, Super Missile Command or whatever.
Missile Attack.
Missile Attack. Yeah, that's what it was. The end user can't choose which version to play, and that's the crux, as far as I understood it, of the Game Genie decision. And I agree with you. Whether or not Atari would have used the derivative argument, and whether or not it would have worked is totally up in the air because it had no precedent at the time. But once the precedent about derivatives comes through, it's game over for all the mod boards. But that's another issue we don't need to get into right now. Yeah.
Yeah. We said we weren't going to talk about legal matters like this, but yeah, we'll come back around to this at some point. This is actually something I've wanted to research and look at the legal language of that stuff, and I've been digging up some more cases lately, but that's a whole other thing. Okay. Now on to ColecoVision related things. You said Nintendo was inspired to create the NES through ColecoVision, but that's not quite right. They were already working on the idea for a programmable console before ColecoVision. It's just that ColecoVision gave them, like, it has to be better than this. Like, that is that was their standard bearer.
Okay. Because I knew that Coleco had shown it to them, as well as showing it to Sega and probably a few others. But I wasn't quite sure whether I didn't know that Nintendo had already started work on a concept. But then again, they had already sold the rights to Donkey Kong and Mario Brothers. No, Mario Brothers not yet, but they had sold the rights to Donkey Kong at that point. So they probably figured out that there was money to be made in that area.
Well, they, at least according to the big article on the Famicom that came out in Japanese a long time ago, it was like December 1981 is when they first started exploring this idea of doing a console. They don't sell the rights to Coleco for making versions of Donkey Kong until February 1982. So, yeah, so I have some dates on that. Though there is implication that Coleco was positing to get Donkey Kong before it was out. That's a whole thing that's actually coming out in something that'll be arriving in the near future, but we'll leave that where it is right now. Another ColecoVision related matter is that Sega did not drop ColecoVision because of the crash. The crash had absolutely nothing to do with what they were going on in Japan. So Sega's decision not to distribute the ColecoVision in Japan has nothing to do with the crash. We don't know the specifics of why they signed the deal to do ColecoVision and then they drop it and then do SG-1000, which is, pretty hardware, close to ColecoVision.
Yeah.
And it's actually something I'm writing about in the book, and I'm trying. It's a little complicated matter, and you can have your own opinions about what you feel about that kind of thing. But it wasn't because of the crash. The crash didn't have any effect on Sega's desirability to launch in Japan. Maybe it did on Coleco's, but when that deal was signed, I don't think Coleco had the option to pull out just themselves.
Interesting. So that would be. Well, it would be interesting to find out why or what happened with that relationship. I'm trying to think now is when name is blanking on me. The Coleco guy who had previously been at Mattel and then later goes on to Epix. What's his name again?
Michael Katz.
Thank you, Michael Katz.
I think he might have.
Epix.
Yeah. I think he was gone by 82. I don't think he saw the launch of the ColecoVision to begin with. So the partners who would have been involved, possibly Al Khan, who was the licensing guy for Coleco. He was the one getting the arcade licenses, but he would have also been working with Sega to get their licenses for stuff like Zaxxon and whatnot. So possibly him. Then Hideki Sato, who is the guy who made the SG-1000, whether or not he's willing to admit, if there were some shady dealings on that. Of course, Hayao Nakayama, but he doesn't talk to anybody. So that's a no-go zone, as well as David Rosen. And maybe Arnold Greenberg, as the CEO of Coleco at the time, might have some insight into that, but right now we don't know, but it probably wasn't just because of the crash. And of the effects of the crash on the ColecoVision, you said that in 1982 they were quote-unquote fire selling the ColecoVision. No, they were increasing in sales in 1983 of the ColecoVision.
Wholesale or retail?
As far I have not seen any big indication that they had any trouble selling through of the ColecoVision, nor do I see in all the ads that I've looked at any huge price cuts immediately. I think the 5200 was being discounted before the ColecoVision was.
Interesting. Okay. I mean, if they were still able to get good orders from retailers at Winter CES in 83, then that would definitely be an indicator that there was still market. I'm just wondering, given the lead time on production and stuff, whether or not they were just selling through existing inventory or not.
No, they were still manufacturing, because they manufactured everything that they could do in 82. 50,000 consoles, and then in the next year they sell 1 million. So
wow. Okay, yeah. So then they definitely
it was increasing, and also there is the promise of the Atom computer, which could upgrade your ColecoVision. So retailers wanted it to succeed.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes a lot more sense. For some reason, I didn't calculate the Atom into it. I just was thinking, okay, then they did that weird promotion where buy a ColecoVision, get a Cabbage Patch doll, or vice versa, and that would have been end of 83.
Yeah, I think right at the end of 83. That's the dark time by then, but like that is, I think I don't think it was necessarily a thing where they were like really that desperate to get rid of the inventory so much as they were trying to drive incentive, especially because also Atom failed to launch when it needed to, and that canceled a ton of their orders, and they really needed to make sure that they had consistent sales. But that is a larger topic. We'll get to it next year. So,
definitely. Yeah,
there'll probably be more to say on that.
Cool.
And last one, and I'm sure that you remember this as soon as you stopped recording, British Broadcasting Company.
Yeah. I did think of it right after we finished recording. I can't believe I didn't think of C being company. Duh. Oh, well.
Okay, that is it for April 1982, and now you can move on to May 1982.
Oh, well, we got a lot of stops before we get to May of 82.
Oh, well, yeah. You do this to yourself, Carl, things. Just so you know.
It's a couple of big things. I mean, come on. 72, May. There's a little event.
Yeah. I know there's a
tiny little one.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Ethan, as always, thank you for your service.
Department of Corrections is done.
So, Carl, just checking you here whether you're actually paying attention when Ethan talks. It was Sanders
Associates.
Okay.
Sanders Associates.
Well done. You passed.
Yeah, it's for some reason that just keeps getting me. I don't know. Because it doesn't make any goddamn sense.
You need to make some work for Ethan as well, of course. So that's all good. Yeah. All good, mate.
Okay. Well. Okay, with that being said, let's turn on the time machine. Before we can go back 40 years, we have to go back 80 years and start with April of 1942.
We do indeed. LaGuardia thinks pinball is responsible for naked cops.
Okay, that's a bit hyperbolic, but New York Mayor LaGuardia is continuing his war against the evils of pinball by explaining on his weekly radio address that the brass in a single pinball game could produce 77 brass buttons for cop uniforms, and that the city had been denied brass under the new metal rationing measures to support the war effort. He would now request to find out when the machines were made to see if they violated the metals restriction in the hopes of ensuring that New York's officers wouldn't have to go without clothing.
That's a bit of a stretch, isn't it?
It's more than a bit of a stretch, but we've talked before on the show about how LaGuardia, before Pearl Harbor, was already gunning for pinball, already had all these plans to take pinball machines out, and then the war rationing just basically gives him carte blanche to go after the machines.
Yeah. So here's hoping he found some clothes for those poor cops.
Yeah. Now, in a very ironic note, I was actually at LaGuardia Airport several years ago, and I found a pinball machine. Just saying.
He lost.
He lost.
So let's jump forward another 10 years.
Yes.
So in 1952, we have Jetlink Fight Trainer gets updated for the computer age.
The classic Link Trainer by Link Technology Incorporated, which trained World War II pilots, has been updated with over 700 electron tubes and 380 computer assemblies, in addition to hundreds of motors to allow pilots to train for flying a Boeing B-47B bomber.
I love these old machines. Are there some pictures I can see on that link?
Unfortunately not. No,
that's too bad.
It's just the straight up news article about it. Gives a lot more specs about, all the stuff that there's going into it. But unfortunately, no, I couldn't find a picture of it.
It would be interesting to get some information about what could they actually do with those tubes and the stuff that they put in here. What kind of interactivity did they have? What kind of responses could they generate from this flight simulator?
Well, one of the things that they can now do that they couldn't do in World War II, according to the article, is that they can not just simulate common problems, which is what the old simulator could do, engine out.
Yeah.
But now the computer relays will allow you to do the subsequent problems. So you can now have a series of problems. So engine goes out, and if you don't react fast enough, it's basically calculating down the time until, the logical result of the first engine going out is too much pressure on another engine, and now the other engine goes out, and and things like this, depending on what reactions they give. Different subsequent response trees will be activated.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
About a deeper simulation, some kind of.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Ready to jump forward another 20 years?
Yes, to May of 72.
Yes. So Magnavox debuts the Odyssey.
Oh, this is where it all begins. A revolution in home entertainment, the Magnavox Odyssey, which will turn TVs into an interactive device, has been premiered by Magnavox.
Yes, so Ralph Baer's famous first console.
Yeah. We've talked last month already about the patents being granted, and now they've done a show at the beginning of the month in New York. Showed off the Magnavox, and later on in the month they will do a second showing of it outside of San Francisco. And basically it's just a premiere of the device and talking about it, and there's a little blurb in the New York Times about the New York show.
So speaking of that showing in San Francisco, Nolan Bushnell signs Magnavox demo visitor lock.
On May 24th, at the Airport Marina in Burlingame, I think it's Burlingame or Burlingame, California, I have no idea, near San Francisco, Magnavox held a demo of the Odyssey. One of those who attended was Nolan Bushnell of Nutting Associates. See, I didn't say and there. He would go on to found Atari the next month and release a little game called Pong.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he probably got some good ideas for a later system as well when he was looking at the Magnavox.
He's going to initially say no and then very quickly pay the Magnavox patent holders a tidy sum of cash.
Yes.
So, yes. Obviously, the bowl and paddle game that's built into the Odyssey plays differently than Pong. So, we will get Pong very soon. Pong is going to change the mechanics of the game sufficiently that it really does become a more playable game than the Magnavox version. But yeah, it's quite clear that this is the inspiration. We talked a few months ago about how Nutting Associates had released Computer Space, and that's hitting the market, that's doing its thing. But Pong is where they're going to make their big inroads.
Yep.
Yeah. So this is, huge news right here.
Indeed. Ready to do the actual jump then?
Let's do the actual jump, and the one that we have a sound effect for.
Technology is 92. Electronic video games. Entertainment business sales have been generally lackluster. There is so much money to be made.
Welcome to 1982. Mads, what's our first story?
Tron to bring computer graphics to the big screen.
With the amazing power of computer workstations sporting 2 megs of RAM and 80 megs of hard drive space, Digital Wizardry will be bringing the world of video games to the big screen this summer. Disney's Tron hopes to tap into the arcade craze and revolutionize how movies are made.
So these are some crazy specs for an 82 computer.
Oh, yeah. This is just, you've got most people drooling over the possibility of 64K. And you're reading in this magazine, and this is the thing, there's a whole bunch of magazines this month that have preview images from the movie Tron. Yep. And the computer mags are doing these articles about the different computer systems that are being used to generate the video imagery in Tron.
Okay. Yeah.
And it is complicated. Have you ever looked into the history of Tron?
No, never.
I believe it was 3, maybe even 4 different companies provided the computer graphics.
Okay.
And in one of those weird twists that is hard to imagine nowadays, but it's something that we're going to see later on with things like, are polygons or voxels going to win the war for 3D and stuff. Nobody knew what was going to be the best way to do 3D computer graphics pre-rendered. So one of the companies, for example, their systems are all designed around doing circular objects.
Okay.
They're not using pixels. So like the speeder bike sequences are done by one company because those speeder bikes are all circular objects.
Yep.
And then when you suddenly see, the other objects, those are being done by another company entirely. And their software is not compatible. There's no standards. Everybody's inventing this as they go along.
Yeah, must be.
And yeah, so there's some great work done on the history of that movie and how the scenes had to be put together and stuff, which is really, really fascinating. And those first images coming out of what Tron will be or what the movie will look like are really it's just mind blowing at that time to see this kind of stuff showing up on the big screen.
So I need to at some point actually watch Tron. I've never watched that movie. So
oh really?
That's a big black hole in my knowledge.
Oh, dude, no, yeah, that's like it's kind of like saying I'm a theologian who's never opened a Bible. No, dude. If you're doing retro gaming, you have to have seen Tron. Is it a good movie? No. It's absolutely a terrible movie. It is completely nonsensical. The story makes no sense. The structure of it is all pretty terrible.
But a couple of years ago, 8 years ago probably, you convinced me to watch the Mario Bros. Movie, and yes. Since then I haven't listened to you whenever you say something about movies you should or shouldn't watch, mate. It's
well, I did warn you that it was terrible, did I not?
Probably, yeah. But not enough.
We still need to do a group watch of some terrible video game movies. But
so I say we watch some Double Dragon then, because that's actually a good movie.
I have not seen it, so this is why I will definitely put myself through it. But the best video game based movie is still Postal. I will stand by that.
Never watched that. I need to see that.
Oh, dude, it's a special kind of bad. It's Uwe Boll actually making a watchable movie, which in itself is kind of like, you can feel the temperature of hell dropping. But yeah, but Tron is an extremely interesting artifact of a time. Where just the idea of trying to explain to a mainstream audience how a computer works, if you know how a computer works, it's completely going in the opposite direction. But at the same time, it's a very, very bold attempt. It's a massive money loser. It's a huge, huge fiasco for Disney.
Okay.
And it's also at a time when Disney can't afford that because they've been doing fiasco after fiasco after fiasco for a while.
Okay.
But yeah, no. As a artifact of its time, it is totally, totally worth watching, especially because it's one of the only movies that's ever featured an Apple Lisa.
Oh, yes. That's true.
So that alone is kind of worth the price of entry.
So speaking of Disney, and fiascos, Disney sues over Robotron.
Disney has filed suit against Williams over their new arcade game Robotron 2084 because they claim it will infringe on their upcoming movie Tron's name.
So I'm guessing they don't win this because it's still called Robotron.
Yeah, this just kind of is sad and pathetic. Plus, the name Robotron was already out there. The East German computer company, state-owned computer company, was called Robotron, amongst other things.
Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah. The IP, the trademark, is still around as a company that does computer IT training.
Okay.
To
Cool.
this day, but yeah, so this has no leg to stand on. But it's a stupid lawsuit. It's going to get dropped very quickly, and yada yada yada.
Let's move on then. Inflation and dwindling manufacturing is killing coin-op profit margins.
Yes. A study commissioned by the AMOA, that's the Arcade Operators Association, amongst others, and conducted by Notre Dame University, has shed a stark light on the prospects of both jukebox and video game operators. The heavy reliance of operators on bars and restaurants as locations for their machines has seen them take a major hit, as many of these locations were dependent on industrial and factory centers that have been shutting down in recent years, and inflationary pressures have prevented the quarter-based takes from rising with the consumer price index. The ever-increasing price of equipment, especially in the game sector, ever-dwindling resale value of said equipment, and the very high double-digit interest rates have made the prospect of investing in coin-op less and less appealing.
Okay. That's early on to have a setback for the arcade business. I would think it would be going from strength to strength these years.
Well, and here we have to distinguish between the video game operators in the traditional sense. So these would be the people setting up machines in restaurants, bars, convenience stores, grocery stores and stuff, and then splitting the take with the owners of the location.
Yeah.
And the video arcade place, like the mall arcades, like the Aladdin's Castles in the United States, which are not reliant on these operators.
Okay.
So they have their own location. The kids are coming and they're playing, not just one game while they're, on their way to buy a gallon of milk. They're specifically coming there to spend an hour or two putting money into machines.
Yeah.
So we have a very different business model, and it's that business model that is starting to crumble and is especially it's open to attack by game consoles, for example, amongst other devices.
Yes. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. And we will get an arcade crash in the not too distant future from this point.
Okay. So, New Jersey arcade age restriction unconstitutional.
A judge has declared that a community ordinance in New Jersey that prohibited entry into video game arcades to those under 18 was unconstitutional because it was too vague concerning its reasoning for the age restriction.
So, do you know the wording of the reasoning for the age restriction?
There was basically there was no age restriction. There was no real reasoning. It was just, they're children.
Okay.
And that wasn't enough because it was seen as a restriction on speech. Okay. So video games in this decision were viewed as a form of speech, a form of expression, and to restrict access to that expression without some kind of good reason, like, moral turpitude, which is the reason why you can prohibit kids from seeing pornography, just wouldn't apply here.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, obviously, in Europe, in a lot of places like Germany, for example, you get a lot of these restrictions, but then it's due to the violent content of the games.
Okay. I don't think we've ever had that in Denmark.
Yeah. In Germany, I mean, virtually all the coin-op arcade games are in gambling halls, which are restricted to people 18 and over.
Yeah, okay.
But, I mean, a few big cities had straight-up entertainment arcades at this point, but they're very, very few.
Okay.
Yeah.
So moving on, increasing legal action banning games unites industry. Wow, I got that really, really bad. I'll try again. Increasing legal action banning games unites industry.
Yes. And this is all connecting to the same thing as before because these laws are popping up everywhere. We've been talking about them for months now. The three major associations representing the coin-op industry, the Amusement Device Manufacturers Association, the Amusement and Music Operators Association, and the Amusement and Vending Machine Distributors Association, have joined forces and hired the Daniel J. Edelman public relations firm to create a 100-page booklet entitled A Community Relations Manual, to help the industry change the public perception of the coin-op video game business and attempt to fight the ever-growing number of local laws limiting the operations of or outright banning of video games.
Yeah, that's a fight we'll see ongoing for years and years.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to slow down, simmer down, especially after the crash, the arcade game crash, where, just the business model is going to collapse. We talked a few months ago about the blue sky businesses where these scam companies selling really crappy games to people who don't know what the hell they're talking about with the promises of make big money by, putting this in your local pizzeria or something. Yeah. So there's a lot of those machines starting to float around. And the fact that a lot of games are coming out, but very few games are big hits. Very few games are games that people are spending a lot of money playing, is going to really cause a lot of operators to go out of business in the next couple of years.
Okay.
And it's also not helping that, games are addictive and our children are becoming zombies and blah, blah, blah. And right now, most of the games are still American or look American. But as the Japanese games become more and more prevalent, there's also going to be a racist aspect to this.
Yeah.
But yeah. And just as a side note, literally there were dozens of notices in the trade publications this month about new laws trying to restrict coin-op video games. I'm obviously not going to report on all of them here because I would just take too long. And the popularity of the machines is increasing public paranoia about the at an exponential rate at this point. And there was also a multi-page article in Playmeter magazine, that's one of the major trade magazines for the coin-op business, about Ronnie Lamb. We talked about her a couple months ago. She basically becomes the public face of the anti-video game activism. She goes on all the TV shows like Phil Donahue and stuff. Big daytime TV show in the States back then. So basically Scare the Housewives. and she talks to them, and in the interview it becomes 100% clear she's probably never played a video game in her life.
It's incredible that people like this even exist, that they want to put themselves out there to just look so extremely stupid.
That's the thing. She's talking to other people who don't understand it.
Yeah.
And therefore it doesn't pop up as stupid. And if you come in as somebody who does understand it and says that's stupid, then the response is, well, you've already been brainwashed by them. That's why you think it's stupid, because you've been brainwashed. And the reason I haven't played them is because I don't want to be brainwashed. It's nonsense. But, you know,
it is. So funny little side note, when as somebody who actually grew up in these times, I don't remember video games ever being perceived as bad in the early to mid 80s. But Dungeons and Dragons, though, that was something the devil made, I think.
The Dungeons and Dragons thing is about to hit.
Yes.
Dungeons and Dragons hasn't been hit yet, but that is coming. We reported, I think it's almost a year and a half, 2 years ago now, the poor teenager who committed suicide. The book about his case that's going to be written by the private investigator hired by his parents to try to help track him down. That is, I don't think it's been published yet. Or if it has been published, it hasn't hit the headlines yet. But once it does, the D&D is going to supplant video games as the new evil thing.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, well, moving on. Midway eyeing legal action against video game books.
Midway, licensor of Pacman, is planning to attack the publishers of the ever-increasingly popular books on how to win at video games. We've talked about the phenomenon several times, and many of the books have been charting high on the bestsellers list. Midway acknowledges that the legal questions will revolve around the publisher's right to free speech versus the game maker's copyright, but they fear that the books may impact the profitability of their games for operators.
That's so ass backwards. I mean, of course, people buying the books will just lead even more people into the arcades. Yes, they will, if they get really good at it, probably spend a bit more time on the machines for less money, but I mean, they'll gather a crowd of other onlookers, and they'll pay more money afterwards. So,
you would think that. The reality is, by the time a book gets published, with the exception maybe of Pac-Man, the games have already outlived their real profitable period in the arcades.
Yeah, it could be. There are those long-lived games, of course, and I guess they would have books.
Exactly. I mean, what we're seeing at this point in time is the last 2 or 3 months, books about Pac-Man came out. But they came out at the same time Ms. Pac-Man came out.
Yeah, okay.
So they're already basically outdated.
Yeah.
Let's say it takes them another 4 or 5 months to get a Ms. Pac-Man book out. By then, Ms. Pac-Man is starting to fade already, and they'll have the next game. And we'll talk about that in a little bit later in the show too.
Ms. Pac-Man never fades, mate. It's still
oh yeah,
wonderful
of
game.
course. Ms. Pac-Man is still probably the most playable and arcade game ever made. I mean, it's just perfect.
I agree.
I mean, when you go into an arcade, you only have one quarter. If there's a Ms. Pac-Man machine, you're probably putting it in Ms. Pac-Man.
Yeah.
That's just the nature of the beast. But, oh well.
So, Carl's favorite pizza restaurant, Chuck E. Cheese, opens its 100th store.
The pizza parlor / arcade / animatronic sideshow has just opened its 100th location, and first in New York State. While 54 of the stores are owned by Pizza Time Theater Incorporated, 46 are franchise operations. By May 22nd, the company's 5th anniversary, they plan to have 130 stores open.
They're really busy, eh?
The fact that they're opening the stores at this speed, and the fact that a little under half of the stores are franchises, means there's a lot of people dumping a lot of money into this thing because of the arcade boom.
Yeah, of course.
And like I said, there's an arcade bust coming not too far into the future.
Yeah, bad timing.
But everybody is going crazy. It's just this is the future. But a lot of it also has to do with the fact that the general economy is in a pretty bad recession. There's really no end in sight, and I've got to do something to make money is spurring these attempts at entrepreneurship.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So, arcade games advertised in Electronic Games Magazine.
This is just a quick note because I commented on how Street Fighter II Champion Edition got full-page ads in consumer gaming mags in our last 30-year jump. And I had never seen something like that before. Well, this month's Electronic Games Magazine has multiple arcade game ads that include ads for The Pit and Ms. Pacman.
And that was even 10 years before.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, I mean, it makes sense that, like I said, arcade bust is coming. Plus, a lot of the magazines are going to die out, so there won't really be a continuous video game magazine industry in the United States. It's going to die out and pick up again in the late 80s. But yeah, this idea of advertising an arcade game in a game magazine that's primarily for consoles and stuff is kind of unheard of in the 90s or late 80s. But here, in the early days, especially during this wild, crazy time with the arcades, I guess it made sense and they did it. So I was just pretty shocked by it.
So I feel convinced you only added this piece of news because you wanted to avoid being corrected by Ethan on it.
No. That wasn't really the concern. It was just I kind of saw it and I was like, oh, this puts it into a different historical context, and I am all about historical context here.
Indeed.
And I get to learn something too sometimes. Yay!
Yes, that's good. And then the listeners get to learn something.
Hopefully.
Bally announces Mr. and Mrs. Pacman Pinball.
Bally says that its research shows the public still has an interest in pinball, and they plan on exploiting the popularity of Pac-Man in this crossover product built around the marriage of the two gaming icons.
Okay, so I've actually never seen a Pac-Man themed pinball table, I think. Did this come out?
This did come out, and of course, Ms. Pacman was MS. She's not married yet, and that's the whole side story of the little cutscenes is the two Pacs getting together and getting to know each other.
Yeah,
and in this one, the artwork is sort of getting close to what the television show artwork will be, but it's not quite that. And the artwork is themed around the two of them getting married. Then there's a stork bringing Baby Pac. Baby Pac's going to get his own game too later. And so we do see that they're trying to keep moving the ball forward on the Pac-Man thing.
Okay.
And so it's interesting. The pinball table is probably not going to be the most successful one in the world, but I can also imagine that it probably sold fairly well given the licensing on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I personally have never played it.
And of course, pun intended on the whole moving the ball forward, right?
I threw it out there and did not know if it was going to ricochet off of a bumper or be a gutter ball. So yeah.
Okay, but speaking of Pac-Man, VCS Pacman is raking up sales.
Racking up sales.
So raking would be actually what you do out in the garden, I guess.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you can also rake up stuff, but yeah, if you're collecting things. But racking up is piling up the sales number.
Yes.
Hey, you learn language here too. Ha. So Pac-Man mania on the VCS sees no end in sight. Stores around the country are reporting that they are selling out as soon as cartridges arrive. Atari themselves estimate that Pac-Man will account for 25% of all home video games sold in 1982, so about 8 million carts.
That's a lot of carts.
That's a tremendous amount of carts. And they're not far off. I found a figure, the total number of carts sold, and obviously it will sell beyond 1982, but the bulk is probably in 82, will actually exceed 8 million.
Impressive.
Sold. Yeah. Now, I don't know how many carts were actually sold in 82. That I couldn't find a reliable number on the quick.
Okay.
I'm sure Ethan's got better figures on this. But then again, we are in the year of the crash, so there's going to be a lot of carts on the market.
Yeah.
And and it's kind of weird because there were so many articles this month in newspapers and magazines about Pac-Man on the VCS. It was just kind of insane. And but it's not just Pac-Man on the VCS that's selling like crazy. Coleco's tabletop Pac-Man is selling like crazy. And there's, I think, 2 other electronic versions of Pac-Man that are also selling like crazy. And then we're not even talking about Atari 400, 800 Pac-Man, which also got released. We talked about that last month. And also the fact that there are all these other products. There's actually an ad in one of the toy publications that was basically just Bally saying, hey, everybody, you can license Pac-Man for anything. And so we're getting stickers, we're getting T-shirts, we're getting mugs, we're getting whatever you can put Pac-Man on. It exists right now.
They are definitely milking that for all the money they've got.
Oh, hell yeah. And they will milk it for quite a bit longer.
So, Bally signs deal with CBS.
Bally has signed a 4-year right of first refusal deal with CBS to port their arcade games to home systems. This follows their deal with Commodore for home computer ports of games like Wizard of War and Kickman. CBS announced their entry into the video game console cartridge market last month through their Gabriel Industries subsidiary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so here, and remember, Bally is Midway. Midway is Bally at this point. So even though they had sold the rights to Pac-Man to Atari, it wasn't an output deal, as we would say in the movie business. So they're not getting – Atari doesn't have first dibs at everything. CBS, which is big television and other media company, they want to get into games in a big way, and locking down Bally is one of those ways to do it.
Yeah. Okay. So now we get to the section that I feel like you really enjoy these days, these months.
I'm going to enjoy this all the way through to the end of the year,
so,
up until we do our
Peter
special.
loves seeing stuff die, and you love seeing stuff crash and burn. So this is the count up to the crash.
Yes, count up to the crash, where we count up all the companies that are jumping into the VCS games business.
Yes. So first off, Coleco announces entry into VCS and in television.
We reported back in March about Coleco promoting their first games for their upcoming Coleco video game system, aka the ColecoVision. But at CES, they also announced that they would be releasing their licensed games for the Intellivision and VCS, as well in the third quarter of 1982.
Okay.
Yeah, and they've got some really good licenses, like, for example, Donkey Kong.
Yes, they do.
Minor little game. And so they're going to be releasing it first on the ColecoVision as, I believe, the pack-in. And then they're going to be releasing ports for the VCS and the Intellivision.
Yep. And other people are jumping in as well. Games by Apollo has problems with their freshman title.
New VCS game maker Games by Apollo has announced that purchasers of their first game, Skeet Shoot, can return the game for a replacement cart if it doesn't work with their television set. According to Pat Roper, president of the company, the outside programmer used too many lines on the screen, and some TVs will need to have the vertical hold adjusted to run the game properly, while others won't work at all with some of the carts.
So that last phrasing here, won't work at all with some of the carts, confuses me a bit. I thought
other
they'd have the same version.
Other TVs won't work at all with some of the carts.
Yeah, some of the carts.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and this is where I don't think it was necessarily only a programming problem. It could have been a programming problem. I think it's also a manufacturing problem.
Yeah, it sounds like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is actually really, really a enlightening moment. And we've talked about this on the show before, how the VCS actually works a little bit. And I'm going to oversimplify. But remember, the thing has no frame buffer. It doesn't have enough memory for a frame buffer. So it doesn't calculate the entire frame of action and then outputs it to the TV like a modern computer would or a modern console. Instead, it's doing the game logic processing at the same time that the beam on the TV is drawing the image on the screen.
Chasing the beam, as they call it.
Exactly. Now, a really, really amazing semi-genius designer, like the guys who formed Activision, they can pull that off.
Yeah.
Now you've got this startup company that's hired a programmer to do this. If they get their timing off, suddenly the game doesn't work on a certain TV, or it doesn't work on the TV period.
Okay.
And so this is where we're starting to see the quality control, that what Nintendo will try to control with their Nintendo seal of quality, which wasn't this game is good, because otherwise LJN wouldn't have been able to publish anything. But this game will at least work.
Which is good, I guess, when you spend your money on it.
It's better than what you got in 1982 when you didn't know if the game was even going to work.
Yep.
And so, yeah, this is very indicative of the problems that are going to happen in Christmas of 82.
But, 10 years later, being an early DOS gamer, that was the same stuff we had to put up with every single time, because Bill decided that 640K of RAM was enough for everybody, and maybe your mouse driver used 2K more than the one that they tested the game with, and it wouldn't load at all because you didn't have enough RAM free. So, oh well.
All I have to say is there's a reason I waited to move to DOS until Windows 95 came around.
Yes. Well, I like DOS, but I do have some really bad memories of trying to load everything into HiMem and getting EMS set up correctly so that I could actually play the game that I bought with my hard-earned money. And sometimes I would give up in the end, or play it without sound to get because then the sound drivers wouldn't have to be loaded. Oh well.
Yeah.
Moving on.
And I stuck with the Amiga, and I had to deal with unbearably long load times and no decent first-person shooters. But at least I was playing.
True.
Yeah.
So Mattel's sales soar.
Yes. So toy maker Mattel posted their 1981 sales numbers that reached a whopping $1.1 billion with a B dollars, an increase of 24%. The electronic side of the business more than doubled the prior year and represented approximately 25% of the company's total sales. In television, sales jumped from 200,000 in the previous year to over 1 million.
Yeah, lots and lots of units being shifted.
Yeah. Obviously, a lot of people, most of the people are still playing on the VCS. That's by far the most popular option. But the Intellivision is beginning to pick up some steam.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So, Video Technology Limited introduces the Creativision? Is that how you're supposed to say that? Creativision?
Yes. I never found somebody. Well, there are people who probably know how to say it, but yeah, Creativision is probably the correct one. Another entrant into the video game console field was introduced at CES. The Creativision looks a lot like the Intellivision with its attached controllers, but unlike Mattel's machine, this has an integrated computer functionality. The controllers, when both placed in their resting spots on the console, form a full QWERTY keyboard, and users can fill the 16K of RAM with basic programs. Video Technology out of Hong Kong would market the system in a variety of European countries under different names, such as EduCat 2002, or in Australia and New Zealand as the Dick Smith Wizard with 2 Z's. It would, yeah, we're going to talk about that in a moment. It would also be marketed as the Funvision computer video game system, Hanimex Ramses, and VT2000.
So that's a whole lot of names, but I just want to know, who on earth is Dick Smith?
As far as I can tell, and I did put a link to the TV commercials for this in the show notes. It's in a longer video together with a bunch of the games being shown. Apparently, Dick Smith's was a chain of electronics retailers.
And were they all big Pratchett fans, seeing as they spell wizard the same way that Rincewind spells wizard?
I do not know. I can't say, but the trademarked iconic logo for Dick Smith basically makes him look like a middle-aged balding guy, so I have no idea.
So I like the idea of the controllers, if they like the Intellivision controllers with all of all the buttons, like a remote almost, that if you have those two lying towards each other, they form a full QWERTY keyboard. That sounds crazy, but somehow really cool as well.
It really cool. I mean, it's still, a membrane.
Yeah.
A real flat membrane keyboard. Probably still better than the ZX81, but not by much. So it is a cool concept, and there is a pretty active fan community for these machines online. There isn't a lot of games. I think the total number of games released for it was only 18. But
that's not a lot.
No, it's not a lot. But the thing is sporting a 6502, and it's using the Texas Instruments TMS 9918 graphics chip, which was the same one used in the TI-99, the MSX, the ColecoVision, and Sega's SG-1000.
Okay.
So it has this very, if I one of my best friends as a kid had an MSX, so I spent a lot of time on the MSX. I know what that graphic chip can do and can't do. Scrolling, not one of the things it really can do very well.
Okay.
But it can do a whole bunch of other things quite well. And so it's interesting that this system has that potential. And 16K of RAM for a console at this point is nothing to sniff at. It's quite kick-ass. But, Video Technology is one of these Hong Kong companies. So, they can launch it in different territories, but it's probably through third parties in those territories, or at least with cooperation from the third parties. And the fact that it's always getting different names and stuff, it's just not going to get that support that it needs.
No. You do, by renaming it everywhere, of course, you don't get to build up a lot of trust with the customers because they can't compare between countries.
That's a big one. And you can't compare between countries. It becomes confusing for developers. And it's just I don't even know if it actually gets a release in the US. I couldn't confirm a release in the US.
Okay.
It's possible it did, but I couldn't confirm it.
Cool. Let's move on then. Yeah. Industry survey shows 50% of electronic users are adults.
While the high electronic toys are bought by adults, the usage seems to be an even 50-50 split between kids and grown-ups. This insight into the category will hopefully help toy retailers adapt to a new type of customer coming into their stores and buying their wares.
So this actually surprises me a bit this early on that if we're talking electronic toys that there's 50-50 split already. I mean, we know today that lots and lots of adults ourselves, as a case in point, of course, still do play computer games and buy a lot of them, or video games. But in 82 already?
Yeah, and I think it has to do a lot with the price.
Yeah.
So just because these devices are so expensive, but also it kind of makes sense. If you're looking at the age groups, I mean, obviously adults is anybody 18 and over.
Yeah. Okay.
So now the question really becomes, I mean, who's 18 in 1981, or who's 20 or 25? So if you're looking at college students, obviously they're going to be playing games. They're the type of people who are in the arcades.
Yeah.
They have that extra cash to spend. And as the games get a little bit more complex, they can afford to, put the batteries in them, for one. And I can't imagine that game players today are that much different than game players then. Would it have been as socially acceptable to admit that you played games? Maybe, maybe not. But that's what this kind of survey can really give insight into, where, the public perception or the stereotypes would hide these numbers.
Yeah.
And it's also important for the toy retailers, because if you're a toy retailer really targeting kids and you're always putting the video games in a kid-based context, you're maybe scaring away potential customers who are going to feel those social pressures to not want to be seen as buying a kid's toy.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah, happens later on with the Nintendo marketing.
Oh, definitely. I mean, Nintendo has sort of been stuck in that, kid-friendly image for a long time.
Yeah.
And they'll occasionally try to break out of it with games like Eternal Darkness or Resident Evil 0 and stuff. But it's very difficult for them to get away from that kid image.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, one little side note here, because of the retailer aspect of it. Part of this study and this article was also that a large majority of major retail chain executives see the adult buyer as the market of the future. So the big retail chains, they've already seen this coming. Where the problem is the small independent toy retailers, and they're still split 50-50, not believing it or not wanting to see it as the trend.
Okay.
And at this point in the United States, Toys R Us is growing and a couple other big chains are growing, but the big bulk of toys are still being sold through the smaller toy retailers, these independent mom and pop shops. That's going to change by the time the NES comes into full bloom. So 10 years later, the mom and pop shops are all but gone.
Okay.
And the video game crash of 82 is going to be a large reason for it, because a lot of them won't be able to survive the losses from that. It's not going to be the only reason, but it's going to be a contributing factor.
Okay.
Yeah. So just thought I'd add that in.
So moving on to the UK, ZX Spectrum premieres at Earl's Court.
Clive Sinclair announced the release of his new computer on the opening morning of the computer fair at Earl's Court. The basic model will come with 16K of memory, expandable up to 48K, color and sound for just £125, or a 48K version for £175.
Yeah, if you want to call that sound, but I know my British friend. They do.
I almost wish Chris would have been on this episode. Oh well.
Yeah. No, the Specky is a great little machine, but the original 48K model with the rubber keyboard, that sound chip that you couldn't turn off or turn down, it's just it's stuff of nightmares, mate. Stuff of nightmares.
Yeah, it is stuff of nightmares. And to call it a full color computer, which already, I think it was Your Sinclair. No, it's not Your Sinclair magazine. It's Personal Computer Weekly. Popular Computing. Popular Computing. It's a British magazine. They their explanation of how the color system works is very generous. They're trying to explain, well, you can do an overlay that's one color, and then you have to these blocks, and how many pixels are in the blocks they don't tell you and stuff. So obviously, there are compromises. The infamous color clash is recognized as one compromise to get the price right from the get-go.
Yeah.
Obviously,
I was just about to say that it's got lots of colors, mate. It's got so many that it leaks out over the others.
Yeah, I mean, granted, when you really think about it, it's a very ingenious way of getting around some of the problems.
Yeah.
But, it will have some issues. They also announced the micro drive, which, again, Popular Computing misdiagnoses, I'm going to use the word diagnose here, as a disk drive. They think, it's going to be a tiny little disk drive that you plug in. Obviously, not obviously, for those not in the know, the micro drive was like a miniaturized version of an 8-track tape that you used on the computer. Yes. And it was flimsy. Is that a nice way to put it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Prone to breakage and data loss and everything else that you can possibly imagine. The micro drive is announced as the great medium for this instead of just, announcing an expensive disk drive. And there's also a lot of speculation in various publications about, what will this mean for Commodore and Acorn? Will they, have to drop their prices to compete with the Speccy? And Commodore obviously has announced already, shown off what will become the Commodore 64 at CES. They've got the Ultimax still on the schedule, but that's going to die fairly quickly. And the VIC-20 is already fairly cheap, but of course, it's still a full keyboard and everything. It is more expensive than the Speccy.
Yeah.
So
yeah, they were definitely geniuses for designing what they could on that budget.
And that's really, you've got to take your hat off for Sinclair's people. They, if you're going to hit that price target, which given the economic realities of England at the time was a very, very real concern, it makes sense to build the machine the way they built it.
Yeah.
But in the long run, you're building in so many limitations that it's going to be very difficult to evolve that technology in any real significant way.
Yeah.
True. It's just a sad reality. I mean, granted, the Amiga is going to fall into a similar trap a few years later.
Yes.
So, we're still at the point of technological development where you have to make those compromises. The memory costs too much. You can never put in a frame buffer into anything. You simply have to sort of, make the best with what you got and hope that the next batch of technology is going to completely revolutionize everything. And you're not thinking about, all the people who wrote their programs on this are going to be able to port it to the new system or, pop in the disk and run it. Backwards compatibility is kind of something you have to abandon at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's sad, but
that's not really something we knew about back then anyway.
I mean, you knew about it. The big mainframes had this.
True, but not in home computers.
Yeah, home computers were being done at such a budget that, nobody was thinking that far ahead that, they're still going to be making Commodore 64s 10 years later. Nobody was thinking that.
True. So, in other Z80-based computer news, we have Grundy, who launches the New Brain.
The New Brain, a 199-pound Z80-based computer with 32K of RAM, has been launched by Grundy Business Systems. The system was originally developed by Newberry Laboratories and was intended to be the computer accompanying the BBC's computer program, the TV show. But after it became clear that Newberry would not be able to mass produce the system, and Sinclair and Acorn got wind of the project and demanded to also be able to compete for the contract, the system was sold off to Grundy, who finished the design. The system, which was designed for portability and in the AD model included a one-line integrated vacuum fluorescent 16-character screen, would only get a production run of 50,000.
A one-line 16-character screen has got to be really, really hard to use.
Extremely
for
hard.
Anything.
But actually very, very similar to what to the TRS-80 portable computer that was launched a few months or half a year ago in the States.
Okay.
And that was actually just a rebranded, I think, not Sony, but it was one of the Japanese manufacturers. So this is actually not an unheard of type of system for these little portable machines.
Okay. But Acorn won that contract.
Acorn wins the contract, but Acorn actually had to get the BBC to change the original spec for Acorn's technology to fit.
Okay.
And I believe the reason was, and I could be completely wrong, but I think the reason was they wanted Z80 so you could run CPM if you wanted to.
Oh, okay.
And the Acorn machine, the BBC Micro, is using a 6502 that you can't run CPM on.
Okay.
So that was the big change, but the problem is the new brain is not going to be ready on time. They're never going to be able to manufacture it.
Okay.
Sinclair with his ZX81, it's just not a machine that you're going to be able to put in a school and have kids pound on it all day long without it collapsing under the pressure.
Nope.
Even though it's cheaper. And Acorn's machine, because they wanted something, English, it had to be an English computer, was really the only other option, as far as I understand the story.
Okay. So, software piracy spawns an industry.
With the number of personal computers growing into the millions and the number of software companies growing to the hundreds, the question of software piracy has become an increasingly important one. The New York Times has an amazing piece focusing on two programs, Nibbles Away and Locksmith, which are software copying programs that aim to bypass copy protection schemes. These two programs are constantly being revised to be effective against the latest copy protections and are also increasingly facing scrutiny from publishers who have been reluctant to run ads for the programs.
Nibbles Away. That's a great name. I like that.
Yeah.
So I wonder what the kind of like copy protection schemes they had going back in 82.
And this is where my technical knowledge is extremely lacking. I've read several articles now in different publications over the last couple years about about different copy protection schemes. One of them was even talking about, I think this may have actually been from one of my interviews, but I couldn't tell you who anymore, where they actually had a modified disk drive when they were making the copies of the game.
Yeah.
That would actually randomly change one of the sectors of the disk.
Mm-hmm.
And so the program would be looking for this randomly changed sector of the disk. And if you copied it, it wouldn't create that flaw, if you will.
Okay.
So there's all sorts of schemes going on to prevent a standard commercially acquired drive from making the copies.
Okay.
And what these guys, the makers of these software programs, are saying is, they're constantly having to update, making new versions. One of them had already had 3 updates that year to outsmart the latest versions of the copy protections.
Yes.
And, the question is, well, is this really necessary? And they're saying, well, people have a right to backup copies. What happens if this $50 disc is suddenly corrupted?
Yeah.
And, they're not completely wrong in that sense. But at the same time, you can also see how people would use this to copy that $50 program for their 5 best friends.
Yes. And of course, that's what happened all the time. But we all said we were just making backup copies.
Yeah, sure. That's what we said. Yeah. You were obviously a far more conscientious speaker than I was back then.
So, speaking of your favorite company, Apple sues Copycat.
Yes. Apple has brought a suit against Franklin Computer Corporation over their ACE 100 computer, an Apple II clone that has copied the ROM file from the Apple II sans copyright notification. The ACE 100 has added a few key features that the Apple II was missing, like a numeric keypad and lowercase letters.
So if they did indeed actually copy the ROM file, I guess they will lose this.
Oh, they're going to lose this. They're going to lose this in 83.
Okay.
And, I mean, they copied it except for the copyright notification. They took that line out. Other than that, it's the same thing. Now, the reason why this is important is as follows. Up until this point, you could copyright stuff on a traditional medium. So if your code was on a disk or something, that was copyrightable because traditional copyright understood what a cassette was or a disk was. Now, things on chips were different for the reason that for the same reason why Commodore did not make a ton of money because originally they owned MOS that developed the 6502. So in theory, every NES that's using a 6502 should have been paying a royalty fee to Commodore. But they didn't get a royalty fee because you could not protect the design of a chip as intellectual property at that time. That's going to happen in, I believe, 83. There's a congressional act that gives protection to the layout of chips.
Okay.
So at this point in time, the question was, if you're putting this on a ROM file, so you're basically printing this on the chip, to put it in simple terms. So it's not a traditional style of medium, it's fixed in this thing. Is it just the layout of the chip? Or is this software just stored in a different medium?
Yeah.
And that's going to be one of the big questions answered here.
Yep.
And it's going to fall in Apple's favor. We've seen a couple of cases similar to this, like with Scramble, the side-scrolling shooter game. That we just had that case a few months ago where the court said, yeah, the images of the ship and the different sprites and the landscapes and stuff, those elements, those are copyrightable images and they're stored on the chips. But we hadn't had that for code yet.
Okay.
So this is where this case is going to become important, together with a few others. Like Microsoft has also filed suit against a company called Advanced Logic Systems from Sunnyvale, California, because they created a board called the Z card, which is basically a one-to-one copy of Microsoft's soft card.
Okay.
Which was an add-on board that had a Z80 processor on it for the Apple II. So if you plug this soft card, this extra board with a Z80 processor into your Apple II, you can now run CP/M.
Okay, yeah.
Which, it's very ironic because it's Microsoft creating a piece of hardware to run somebody else's operating system.
Yeah, but early days, mate. Early days.
It was before the IBM PC came out. This when they launched this. But you see ads for the soft card in every Apple magazine for the last 2 years.
Yeah.
Because it's an extremely valuable thing for the Apple community to have that business software. Now, VisiCalc has changed all that. But it's still one of those things where, you want to your work, the stuff you did at work, you still want to run it on your home Apple II, you need the soft card.
Yes.
And what ALS, Advanced Logic Systems, did was they just copied the BIOS and boot code from the soft card. And so Microsoft's going to sue them, and they almost immediately get an injunction. ALS stops selling it. I don't know if they try to re-engineer it later on. But these cases are going to become extremely important precedents when IBM goes after the people making PC clones. Because the IBM PC is using off-the-shelf parts except for the BIOS. Okay. And what those companies are going to do, in large part because of these precedents, they're not going to try to steal the BIOS. Well, a few of them will, but they're not going to try to steal the BIOS. They're going to have to reverse engineer it.
Yeah. Well, it's good that they lost this because that is of course it's software that's stored on these ROMs. So
yeah. I mean, just think about the software stored in game cartridges. Same concept, really.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, sticking at Apple. With Apple, we have Apple pushes for tax code change.
Yes, lots of Apple stories today. Apple is lobbying for a change to the U.S. tax code to allow them to give computers to elementary and secondary schools and be able to deduct the expense. A similar deduction already exists for gifts to universities. Apple says that it will give an Apple II to every elementary school and secondary school in the country if the change is made, which, according to the Wall Street Journal, would be in excess of 80,000 machines. Of course, the change in the tax code would not be exclusive to Apple, but as this month's editorial in Compute magazine explains, the move could be seen a bit cynically in light of the fact that Apple has refused to enter the sub-$600 computer market now occupied by machines like the Atari 400, TRS Coco, VIC-20, and soon the C64, which provide more computing bang for the buck than a $2,000 Apple II. Apple has already seen its portion of the educational market dwindle, with large buyers like the Minnesota Educational Consortium and Miami-Dade County investing in non-Apple machines, a trend that the price consciousness of educators will no doubt increase.
Yeah, I wonder why the Apple II was still so expensive at this point, if it was because they had huge profit margins or whether it was just a lot more expensive for them to produce.
I don't know whether or not it was just inefficiencies in their system, but I think it was partially also the fact that they wanted that premium product image. That fits with a lot of what Steve Jobs always was doing.
Yes.
And the Apple II is already getting certain upgrades, but also remember they're financing a ton of R&D into new systems like the Apple III, which just got a big redesign and is still a piece of crap. The Apple Lisa, which, like I said, is going to show up in the movie Tron, so it's at least already in the prototype phase. It hasn't hit the market yet. The Apple Macintosh project is also already in development at Apple at this point. So, they've got all this R&D going on. They have a very loyal base of users. So they don't really feel the pressure. Also remember, they've gone public. So there's a lot of money that came in through the IPO. They can keep the price up without having to do this, especially because the other companies, just like Apple, are going through all these relatively small specialized computer dealers.
Yeah.
So, there is that issue. And when I talked to Wild Bill Steely of Microprose, when he went to buy his first computer, and he needed to buy it because they were setting up the Microprose business, and he needed something to keep track of the sales that they were doing, and which place was buying which game and stuff. He went to a computer dealer, and the computer dealer was like, "Oh, you need VisiCalc. Here's an Apple II." And right next to it, he saw an Atari 800 that was playing the Star Raiders. And he was like, that looks really cool. Does that also have VisiCalc? He's like, yes, but that's a toy computer. He's like, no, I'm taking that.
Yeah.
So he ends up buying the cheaper machine that also does the business stuff, but also plays the cool games. And if you've looked at Apple II graphics, you know that that's not where you're going to be.
Nope, true.
So this is where, and I know there's the Apple II heads out there. I'm very sorry, but the graphics always did suck. You could do really good things if you coordinated it just right. It was never going to be an Atari 8-bit.
Oh.
But I mean, it shouldn't have to be, because the graphics system is from 1977. So, duh. But they're keeping this price high because they can, and this is going to they're going to need an edge to stay in the educational market.
Yes.
And if they can give away the machines, and I found a later interview with Steve Jobs where an article, and it's linked in the show notes below, and there's a quote from Steve Jobs talking about how, they didn't get they do get the tax code change, and they can deduct it, but they're still losing about 10% of the cost of the machine. But once you have an Apple II in the school, if they're going to buy more machines, it's probably going to be more Apple IIs.
Yeah.
And everybody who grew up in the 80s in the United States, you grew up with Apple IIs in your school pretty much. And that's going to go all the way through to the 90s. And when I was in high school in the States in 95, we had nothing but Macs for the same reason.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and the initiative that they're going to have is going to be called Kids Can't Wait. So this is going to be their famous initiative. It's got like the Apple logo and a pencil in the background and stuff. You know, kids can't wait. They need the computers now. And
yes.
That this is going to be they're locking down that market before anybody else can get in. It's also going to help that Atari, which was basically making big inroads here, when the crash happens, the VCS market tanks, and Warner Brothers starts to kill off Atari, the entire Atari operation to get into educational markets is going to be gutted when the Tramiels take over. Because they don't have the money to keep financing it.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, Apple definitely had great success with putting all the machines out at schools. So
yeah,
that also meant that the pupils would ask their parents for an Apple computer when they got back home.
Very much so. And yet the parents are going to go to the major retailer and find that there's only Commodore machines.
Yes, and that the Apple II is far too expensive for home use. So,
well, it's not going to be in the major retailers.
Oh.
In the standard everyday retailers,
yeah,
you're not going to find it, because Apple is going to stick with their distributors.
Yes, of course.
That brings us to our next story.
Yes. Apple cancels distribution deals.
Apple was sued by a New York dealer after they canceled their distribution deal with them. The court upheld the cancellation, saying that the dealer was given a proper 30-day notice as per their contract. This follows after Apple also canceled its distribution deal with the largest computer chain in the U.S., Computerland, and Apple says it wants to gain more control over its distribution channels.
And I guess they did then.
Well, yes and no. So I did a little digging, and the final fallout of this is probably something we're going to discover in more articles over the next year. But so Computerland at this point is the biggest chain in the United States, but most of the stores are franchises, which means that they're independently owned and just using the Computerland logos and benefiting from the contracts with manufacturers that Computerland can obtain.
Okay.
Now, what Apple wants is they want to certify each individual franchise of Computerland as an Apple retailer, as an Apple dealer, sorry. And one of the provisions that would entail is that you can't open up another Apple dealer within a certain area next to where an Apple dealer already exists.
Okay.
Because what's happening right now is that you have these exclusive Apple dealerships, and they're getting squeezed out because a Computerland will open up right next door or nearby. That is not just selling the Apple computers, because Computerland has a contract, but is also selling the Commodores and the Ataris and whatever else.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, the standalone Apple dealer can't compete.
No.
And so Apple wants that control. And if you're an Apple dealer, they can also control, how you present it and all this other stuff. And so they've canceled their contract with Computerland. Now, there's still a few months to go before it expires. And apparently a similar hullabaloo happened a year or two earlier, and they ended up resolving it. But it really does look like Apple is trying to play hardball here. Because they want their exclusive position and everything, which is going to backfire on them as soon as the Commodore 64 is available at Walmart and Fred Meyer and all the other, normal retailers where you can also buy a shirt and some hamburger patties and the latest vinyl album from a rock band. Because then it's going to be like, who cares about the dealerships anymore?
Yeah, true.
Yeah. And they did a similar thing also. This was another side note that I noticed someplace else, that they also canceled their distribution deal with their Japanese partner. And they're going to be launching their own distribution in China. In Japan. Sorry.
In Japan, okay.
Yeah. So it's... Let me just put it this way. I don't know it for certain, but I believe this is the beginning of Apple's management getting tired of Steve Jobs.
Well, he leaves them for a few years and gets back again.
It smacks of Steve Jobs all over. But I don't know that for certain.
Okay. Oh, well, he gets back in there after next anyway, so it's all good.
That's true.
It's all good. So SSI introduces yearly updates.
SSI's Computer Baseball has received an update in the form of the 1981 Computer Baseball Team Data Disc. The update can be obtained by sending $15 to SSI. They have also created an update to their Napoleon's Campaigns game, which allows players to accompany the computer game with physical miniatures, also available for $5 when you return your disc.
So is this the first time they do these yearly updates?
It's
I know
the
from
first
your
time
interview that they did that a number of times.
Well, it's the first time I found at this point.
Okay.
There's going to be some updates for John Madden Football later on, but I mean that's almost a decade later. And I've had no other, at least for a commercial product, where somebody's updating with the latest rosters and the latest numbers. Okay. Now, obviously, this is all unofficial. There's no, Major League Baseball license or anything attached to this, but it is kind of cool to see it. This may be the first time that this has been done.
Yeah, nice. And quite early on.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So, Wizardry continues with Night of Diamonds.
Yes, it's a bunch of updates and continuations here today. In a decision that will come to haunt the groundbreaking series, Surtech has launched Wizardry the Night of Diamonds, a second scenario for the original game, Proving Grounds of the Mad Overlord, that requires the players to have the original game, $49.95 for the original, $34.95 for the second new scenario, and a character of at least 13th level. This is not an unprecedented business model. Epix has been doing it with the Apshai series for a few years now, but it will ultimately hold the series back while others like Ultima take the lead.
Does seem like a steep price if what they're giving you is not a new game, but just a new story being told within the same game, right?
Well, there's a couple of factors here. The idea of standardized pricing for games doesn't exist yet.
Nope.
So when I'm looking through these magazines, I'm seeing retail prices for games that are just all over the map. Now, Wizardry, even this second scenario, is relatively big as far as a game is concerned of this time.
Okay.
But, it's still, they do say it's not as big as the original game. It is more challenging because if you're not at least 13th level, they say you're going to die immediately. You're just going to get killed. But the fact that you need the original game to create the character. You can't create a new character with this game. You have to have played through the first game to have a character sufficiently high level enough to even start the next version. They're going to keep this going for a few more games.
Okay.
And the Ultima series is basically going to be rewriting almost the entire game from scratch every time.
Yeah.
And also allowing you can always start at any one of the games, which is going to also free it from a lot of the very basic graphical conventions of the first couple of games.
Yeah.
Whereas Wizardry is using, is using. Oh, I almost said it. Ethan would have had my head. It's not polygonal graphics. It's vector images.
Okay.
So, it's just using plotted points and connecting them with dots for the graphics.
Yeah.
That's not really going to be sustainable within a year or two.
Okay.
Even on the Apple II. And it's also going to make it very difficult to jump into the game on different platforms because, are you going to be porting the original game to other systems later or not? All of that becomes complicated.
Yeah. So same kind of graphic routines as they used in Sheriff on the Mystery House game, for example.
Yeah, only those are filled.
Ah, okay.
And these are not.
Okay.
Or at least
like
some of those
wireframes.
are filled. No, Mystery House I think is still... I don't know. I can't remember if Mystery House has them filled, but by the second or third online system, so Ken Williams programmed games, they are using filled graphics.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, well. Scott Adams updates Adventureland.
Scott Adams, the grandpappy of home computer adventure makers, is launching an updated version of his original game, Adventureland, with new high-res graphics on the Apple II and support for the Votrax type and talk voice synthesizer.
Ooh, that sounds high-tech.
Oh, yes. It's, in practice, it's not that high-tech. But yeah, so he's taking his old adventure game, which was pure text. Now it has, the vector drawn graphics in color. He claims 100 colors, but what he's really talking about is combinations of the Apple II's colors with, different combinations of dithering.
Okay.
And which, oh my God, they are drawn so slowly. And I did include video, not of the Apple II version, but of the VIC-20 version connected to this Votrax type and talk voice synthesizer.
Yeah.
And what it does is it's basically just a synthesizer producing sounds of all the text that's on the screen.
So producing is actually reading up all of the text on screen.
Yeah.
Oh, so it had that big vocabulary, or was it trying to synthesize on the almost single letter level?
It's not doing it on the single letter because that doesn't really work in English.
No.
But it does recognize certain patterns of letters to create certain sounds. Now, I don't know which chip it was using, but it wouldn't surprise me if it was using the Texas Instruments chip or one of the Texas Instrument chips, because they had a fairly good synthesizer already back in the 70s. Okay. And that's why they could do things like a speak and spell. The famous device from the E.T. movie.
Yes, I know those.
Yeah. And that was just using a synthesizer chip that was inside the device.
Yeah.
So it's using one of those synthesizer chips to produce the sounds, and it's not. It's very slow. It's very plodding. You would turn this off after 5 minutes.
Yeah. Okay.
Because
more of a gimmick, I guess, and definitely more impressive in '82 than we would think it is today.
Well, and Scott Adams is starting to feel the pressure because while his adventures were quite revolutionary when they first came out, now 2-3 years later, he's up against Zork. He's up against Zork and Sierra, and the expectation of complexity in the games. He's up against real RPGs like Ultima and Wizardry. His puzzle design was never that great. His parser technology is very, very lacking, and he's not really upgrading any of those elements. Adding a new coat of paint in the form of graphics is not going to change the fact that, the adventure itself is not that hot.
No.
And so, but it is interesting because this may also be a first. It may be the first time that we're getting a deluxe updated version of an existing game.
Yeah.
There may have been others before that. Obviously, if you look at, just people doing pirated or illegally inspired Space Invader clones. Obviously, there were 1,000 of those.
Yeah.
But here we actually see a manufacturer taking an old game and on the same system giving it a complete rehaul and putting it out again. This may be the first time that that's happening.
The first remaster.
Exactly. Something that today we see all the time, but this might be the first time. Yeah,
it feels like we see more of those than actually new games. So
it just feels that way. You haven't looked at how many games are being released every day on
that's true.
Handheld on phones. But yeah, we're seeing a lot of them because let's face it, a lot of the game designs, if you just polish them up and a few quality of life improvements, a lot of them are still extremely good designs, and there's no reason not to use that property again and again. It's been working for Hollywood for years, so why not for games?
That's why we're retro gamers, mate. We know that all the good games have already been made.
All I'm saying is, Electronic Arts, why are you sitting on Project Firestar? Come on!
Yeah.
No, that's
one can only hope.
That's never happening. No. The copyrights and everything would be way too complicated, and no, they're never going to do that. But there are plenty of good old games that have not been remade yet, and I want a good commercial re-release of Stunt Car Racer running at 60 frames per second with good online multiplayer. That's what I want. Is that so hard, people? Oh, speaking of which, have you seen some guy got Stunt Car Racer for the C64? He upgraded the code to work with a super CPU.
No.
Oh, you can Google a video of it. It's running at 60 frames a second now.
On an actual C64.
On an actual C64 using a super CPU. So it's not really a C64 anymore. It's like a 30 megahertz machine now.
Oh, yeah.
But still using the same graphics. And it's so smooth, but at the same time you notice some of the shortcuts that Jeff Crammond had to do to make it work. Like the tires are just these flat squares.
Yeah.
And you don't notice it that much when you're at like 8 frames a second, but at 60 frames a second they look really, really weird. So, cool stuff.
Yeah, well, these games weren't designed for that.
This is true. This is
back in the day we were happy with 6 to 8 frames per second.
Hell, it could drop to 4 and we'd still be playing it.
True.
Yeah. After going 20 miles through the snow to school, Okay.
Yeah, uphill both ways.
Yeah.
Okay, so for the last bit of news for today is EA is getting born.
Yes. On May 27th, 1982, Trip Hawkins founded Electronic Arts. I'm not sure if he was still an Apple employee at the time, but I don't think so. I think he already left Apple, but I cannot confirm that at this moment. But he starts this company. He's going to try to use the principles of a music label to start the company. He's going to poach some very big names from other companies, people like Bill Budge. And, well, the rest is going to be history.
Oh, yeah. Still on one of the huge ones today.
Yeah. I didn't include this in the count up to the crash because, well, EA is not going to get into consoles for a very, very long time. In fact, That's going to be one of their guiding principles is the future is computers, not consoles.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then, granted, that's also going to lead them down the path of a very large, very unsuccessful investment in the Amiga. But because of that, we get deluxe paint. So it's all good at the end.
Yes. No, I've actually heard some of your interviews. People talk about that. Of Tripp's all of a sudden jumping away from the Amiga when he sees far too late that this isn't going to be a good platform for him to invest in.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of things there. I mean, Tripp had the insight to understand early on that this wasn't an aspect of the industry that was going to be huge. And you have to give him full credit for that. And the understanding of getting, sports personalities attached to the games as a marketing thing. And the idea of using established names of game creators to sort of, bolster the line, that's not going to take off as well ultimately. But I think that his idea of a professional publisher, making tools available to creators and letting the creators run, especially in those early years when it really was one or two, maybe three people making a game, was the right move. And sometimes, I mean, if Joel Billings, for example, talked about it, the founder of SSI, in my interview with him, when, he started poaching people away from him, it really is an issue of he went after the talent and he gave them, really good royalty rates. He gave them the ability to develop more easily, and he also gave them the ability to have this really, really massive distribution channel. So that's I mean, and then later on you get the EAD, which was their distribution arm. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that EA innovates and in many ways creates the video game world we live in today.
Very much so. I mean, if you like them or not, that's not really the question. If you look at media, look at the print media and TV and everywhere, even today, EA were the first really, really big commercials I remember for video games. That looked just as important and as big as commercials I'd see for movies or music releases or anything of that kind of media as well, and not only in the gaming press but in the regular press as well.
Yeah, I mean, he really saw the potential, and I mean, a lot of that is probably goes back to his time at Apple, where his job was to be an Apple II evangelist, and he very much, I think, bought into that idea that the computers were the future and that the software for those computers, the things that they allowed you to do, were going to be key to the success of those machines.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's also where he differed from Steve Jobs, who thought, gaming, poo-poo, we do not do gaming. But I think that Tripp understood the power of games because he was a gamer, going back to strategy games and sports strategy games and stuff like that. And I really think that despite many, many flaws, and of course EA has a terrible time early on, they almost failed during the crash, and there are a lot of hiccups in that trip, haha.
Yeah.
and of course, and there's the 3DO and all these other things. The guy's wasn't perfect, not all of his bets paid off, but he did have that initial vision at a time when most people were basically winging it. I mean, most of the interviews I've done with publishers and founders of companies at this time, they're winging it. They're, seat of their pants. Well, if a good game comes in, we'll publish it type of thing, or we'll copy what else is out there. But this idea of trying to build a long-term infrastructure as a publisher that comes from EA.
Okay. Yeah. So we finish off with the birth of something instead of a company going down. I like that part.
Well, and I mean, it's not just any company. I mean, this is huge. And it's an anniversary that, even though, of course, there's no news articles talking about it, it's an anniversary that deserves mention here on the show.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, so that is the end of our time jump. We made it through in somewhat passable time. So, Mads, before I let you go to bed, what is the word of the episode?
So, seeing as you say there is a 50-50 split between adults and kids buying these electronic toys, I guess adult entertainment would have to be the word for today.
It's 2 words, but I will definitely take it. Adult entertainment is the word of the episode. Mads, tell everybody where they can find you.
They can find me at the Retro Asylum, the podcast where I do with Dean, Matt, Steve, and Chris, all about the retro gaming, and on the Playthrough podcast, where I play some more modern or middle-aged games and do deep dives into those games.
Very cool. I'll put as always, the links to all that is in the show notes. Check it out. I'm an avid listener. And everybody else, remember, if you like what we're doing here, support us on Patreon. $1 a month gets you early access to our interviews. We've got a great one with the former treasurer of Commodore right now up there that you can enjoy. And you also get to watch the video versions of the 7 Minutes in Heaven videos. Okay, with that being said, everybody, have fun.
Bye.
Sweet.